Hey everybody, it is Monday, April 6th. I am still here with this little ugly cat, and I'm gonna read the 5th chapter for today. It's the last one of our week, and it's called Snoz Cumbers. When we first met the BFG, I asked you what kind of person he is, and at the end of this chapter, I want you to think about that again. Now that you know him a little better, what kind of person is the BFG? All right, so here we go, Snozcumbers, which I know the BFG talks a little funny. A snozcumber is different than a cucumber. He's not just like messing up the words. It's like a different vegetable. All right. But if you don't eat people like all the others, Sophie said, then what do you live on? That is a squelching, tricky problem around here, the BFG answered. In this slosh-flunking giant country, Happy eats like pineapples and pigwinkles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky-poo vegetable. It's called the snozcumber. A snozcumber? Cried Sophie. There's no such thing. The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. Yesterday, he said, we was not believing in giants, was we? Today, we is not believing in snozcumbers, just because we happen not to have actually seen something with our own 2 little winkles. We think that it is not existing. What about, for instance, the great squizzly Scotch hopper? I beg your pardon, Sophie said. And the humplecrimp. What's that? Sophie said. And the rap rascal. The what? Sophie said. And the crumpscroddle. Are they all animals? Sophie asked. They is common animals. That means you can see them a lot, said the BFG contemptuously. I is not a very know-all giant myself, but it seems to me that you is an absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool. You mean cotton wool, Sophie said. What I mean and what I say is 2 different things, the BFG announced rather grandly. I will now show you a snozcumber. The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long, again, as an ordinary man, but much thicker. It was as thick around its girth as a perambulator, which I don't even know that word that well, but I think it is like a stroller. So it's like about as wide as a stroller. It was black with white stripes along its length, and it was covered all over in coarse novels. So here's a picture of the giant with a snozcumber. It does look a bit like a cucumber, just giant. All right. Here is the repulsant snozcumber, cried the BFG, waving it about. I squoggle it, I despise it, I desponge it. But because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like the other giant, I must spend my life guzzling up icky-poo snozcumbers instead. If I don't, I'll be nothing but skin and groans. You mean skin and bones, Sophie said. I know it is bones, the BFG said, but please understand that I cannot be helping it if I sometimes is saying things a little squeedily. I is trying my very best all the time. The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn, like so sad, that Sophie got quite upset. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to be rude. There was never any schools to teach me talking in giant country, the BFG said sadly. But couldn't your mother have taught you? Sophie asked. My mother? Cried the BFG. Giants don't have mothers. Surely you was knowing that. I did not know that, Sophie said. Who ever heard of a woman giant? Shouted the BFG, waving the snozcumber around his head like a lasso. There was never any woman giant, and there never will be one. Giants is always men. Sophie felt herself getting a little muddled, confused. In that case, she said, how were you born? Giants isn't born, the BFG answered. Giants appears, and that's all there is to it. They simply appears, the same way as the sun and the stars. And when did you appear? Sophie asked. How on earth could I be knowing a thing like that? Said the BFG. It was so long ago I couldn't count. You mean you don't even know how old you are? No giant is knowing that, the BFG said. All I is knowing about myself is that I is very old and crumply, perhaps as old as the earth. What happens when a giant dies? Sophie asked. Giants is never dying, the BFG answered. Sometimes and quite suddenly a giant is disappearing and nobody is knowing where he goes to. but mostly us giants is simply going on and on like whiffsy time twiddlers. The BFG was still holding the awesome snozcumber in his right hand. Now he put one end into his mouth and bit off a huge chunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise he made was like crunching lumps of ice. "It's filthing," he sputtered, speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of snozcumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around the tabletop, ducking out of the way. "It's disgusterous," the BFG gurgled. "It's sickable, it's rotsome, it's maggot-wise. Try it yourself, this foulsome snozcumber." "No, thank you," Sophie said, backing away. "It's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it," said the BFG. "Go on, you snipsy little winkle. Have a go." Sophie took a small nibble. "Ugh," she sputtered. "Oh no, oh gosh, oh help." She spat it out quickly. "It tastes of frog skins," she gasped, "and rotten fish." "Worse than that," cried the BFG, roaring with laughter. "To me it's tasting of clock coaches and slime wagglers." "Do we really have to eat it?" Sophie said. "You do, unless you is wanting to become so thin you will be disappearing into thin air," Sophie said. "A thick ear is something quite different." Once again, that sad, winsome look came into the BFG's eyes. "Words," he said, "is such a twiddling problem to me all my life, so you must simply try to be patient and stop squibbling. As I'm telling you before, I know exactly what words I'm wanting to say, but somehow or other they is always getting squiddled around." "That happens to everyone," Sophie said. "Not like it happens to me," the BFG said. "I is speaking the most terrible Wiglish." "I think you speak beautifully," said Sophie. "You do?" cried the BFG, suddenly brightening. "You really do?" "Simply beautifully," Sophie repeated. "Well, that is the nicest present anybody has ever given me in my whole life," cried the BFG. "Are you sure you was not twiddling my leg?" "Of course not," Sophie said. "I just love the way you talk." "Oh, how wondercrump," cried the BFG, still beaming. "How whoopsie splunkers, how absolutely squiffling. I is all of a stutter." "Listen," Sophie said, "we don't have to eat snozcumbers. In the fields around our village there are all sorts of lovely vegetables, like cauliflowers and carrots. Why don't you go get some of those the next time you go visiting?" The BFG raised his great head proudly in the air. "I is a very honorable giant," he said. "I would rather be chewing up some rotten snozcumbers than snitching things from other people." "You stole me," Sophie said. "I did not steal you very much," said the BFG, smiling gently. "After all, you was only a tiny little girl." And that's the end of that chapter. So the question for this chapter again is, what kind of person is the BFG? Now that you know him a little better. I will talk to you all later. Bye.